Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 spiritual books that inspired him the most on his life journey is international teacher, mystic and poet Richard Rudd, who spent the last 2 decades helping people uncover the higher purpose of their life through a sacred teaching known as the Gene Keys, a universal wisdom embedded within the structure of human DNA, waiting to be activated and unlocked. Since receiving the Gene Keys in 2002, Richard has continued to extend and embody the wisdom he receives and sharing the keys to discovering your hidden genius, unlocking prosperity and awakening the heart with programs such as the Venus sequence, the Corpus Christi teachings, the 7 sacred seals, and many, many more. Richard Rudd, welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. It's lovely to be here.
Good to have you, Richard. So tell me, do you recall the first spiritual or mind-opening book that you read?
I do. Do you know what? I think it was a really kind of schmaltzy book by Linda Goodman.
Oh, I know them all.
Way. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. The young sort of 15-year-old or whatever I was just ate it up whole. Good old Linda Goodman, amazing astrologer she was.
Amazing astrologer, yeah. She wrote a really interesting book called Star Signs, which wasn't so much about astrology, but about all other kinds of weird things like purple plates and lexiclamming.
Totally. I loved it. I loved it. It was Sun Signs, I think. There was the one that came my way, and I was like, what is this world?
Yeah, I think she taught everybody, all the best and the worst of all the different signs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what do books mean to you?
Well, I've always loved books, and as a poet myself and a lyricist, and a love of the use of words and literature, and so at school, and that was the only thing I was really good at, was words, literature, English. Those were the subjects I excelled in kind of naturally, and languages as well. I love languages. So for me, it was like, books is not just about my own language, English. It's also, I try and read in other languages as well, even languages that I don't understand very well, just because sometimes getting a taste, or sometimes listening to people reading, books in other languages, and or poetry in other languages is an exquisite thing to do. I do that a lot. So yeah, it's the books are wonderful, aren't they? They keep us company in life.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I'd be lost without them for sure.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you to have to distill your list of favorite books down to just 10?
It was a challenge, of course, really challenging. And lots of books came in and went out, and came in and went out. Some stayed, and I gave it lots of time. You were very patient with me. So, yeah, I mean, I guess in the end, I had to throw out some favorites, but I chose ones that I thought might be a bit more interesting to others, that they might not have heard of, but also had an equal impact in me. So there are some less obvious ones in my batch, and and they're not all overtly spiritual. They are spiritual, but some of them are really works of literary art as well.
Yeah.
And so that's the area, that's the kind of place that I like to, that's the sweet spot, something that's really beautifully written and carries the transmission. I'm not so like the Linda Goodman stuff. I love it. I loved it when I was young, but I'm a bit more, refined in my linguistic taste. So I like to have that exquisiteness in an someone that really has a good turn of phrase with language and can write well. I really love.
Did this process do anything for you?
Well, it did, I think, because it sort of, you revisit the books that came to you, and then you kind of think of where you were when you read them. And I had a little kind of memory journey with this. And like as you know, one of the books that I kind of changed at the last minute was the complete works of William Wordsworth, great English poet. And I just thought, let's, and I because that was one of the introduction to how to use language in a way that was just magical, came from him. But I haven't included those. They got chucked out by a rogue, and which we'll probably talk about. But yeah, it's a real journey back into what happened with me in my teenage years, in my 20s, my awakening, and then how books have become rarer for me to read nowadays. But so I choose them really carefully, and they come along, but in the beginning it was thick and fast, and I was devouring them, as I'm sure is the case for many people when they first awaken to the mysteries.
Yeah, it's interesting because some people groan when I invite them to do it. I couldn't possibly do that. No. And then afterwards they say, oh my God, that was like having a life review without having to die.
So true. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with your first book, the one that you tossed out Wordsworth for, which is The Rebel. Yes. The very salt of the earth by Ocean.
Yes, this man.
Yes.
I had to kind of put him in there because it was in my 20s. Osho, he's such a kind of someone was saying to me today, he's not been that well remembered, in terms of there was scandal around him, but actually if you dive into his and he didn't write. That's the other thing. It's like he just spoke, and people wrote down what he spoke, and it was been very well edited by his people. But he was an extraordinary man. And what I loved about him, other than his roguishness, which I will always appreciate, and his wicked sense of humor, is that dazzling intellect, and combined with an enlightened understanding of wisdom. And he read, he's one of the, I don't know, I haven't found many spiritual teachers who've read more broadly than I have. And I looked in other languages, and then it's like, and I look into, like, I've gone really broad in my life, and he's like my yardstick. Like, he's spoken on masters and teachers and teachings that are so obscure and from all different walks of existence. And I love The Rebel because it kind of, it resonates with my kind of teachings of the new human. And The Rebel was his series of talks on the new human coming into the world.
Yeah. Did you when you read that book in your 20s, did it immediately click with you, or was it strange? Did you have to kind of get into it?
Not that one, because I think I'd warmed up by that time. I mean, I read probably 3/4 of the books that he's got mammoth amount of books have been transcribed of him. And I read a lot of them over 2 or 3 years. I think I must have read just, I don't know, 50 or something. And that was one I read towards the end. And so when you read someone like that, you're taking in their whole energy field over and over, and you're imprinting yourself with that consciousness, that enlightened consciousness. And you don't even often know why you're doing it. There's a hunger in you that you have to know this being, and obviously he died before I knew, so I couldn't go and see him. And so I got him through his books. But that book was the crystallization of, like, what became my understanding of there's a new rebellious human being coming into the world, and I think we're seeing it more and more all the time.
yes.
But his version of the rebel wasn't just revolutionary in terms of like, here's another rebellious soul. It was rebelliousness with love, with deep compassion and wisdom, and that's what really caught my imagination.
Yeah, and with purpose.
Yeah.
Book number 2 is The Philosophy of Wine by Vela Hamvas, published in 1989.
I haven't got them all, but I have got a copy.
Is it really about wine?
This is absolutely a marvelous book. I mean, this man is extraordinary, and very few people have heard of him outside Hungary, Hamvas. And I sort of feel almost like I discovered him or rediscovered him, and I've been talking about him to lots of people. And most of his work hasn't been translated into English. I'm actually having some of it translated privately so that I can read it. But this book, The Philosophy of Wine, it's really an essay, a long essay of like 80 pages. But it kind of goes well out of the rebel, because he was this genius Hungarian kind of national treasure. He's Hungary's Shakespeare, right? So if you go to Hungary, everyone knows him, right? But it's such a tricky language. And so to translate it well is challenging. And this, it's an essay. You can find it online and stuff. You might be lucky enough to find a copy of it somewhere. And this is translated by a guy called Peter Sherwood, who I met. I got hold of him. When I like something, I follow it. And I met Peter, and I said, "Who is this man?" And he's a Hungarian Englishman, lovely man, a real gentleman. And anyway, so he translated a lot of Hamvas's works. But this book he uses wine as a symbol, but he also is a lover of wine. And so it's kind of really profound. You've never come across anyone that goes so deeply into the poetics of the mouth and the sensuality of the mouth. And he calls them mouth harmonies. I mean, you've never read anything like this anywhere else, I guarantee it. It's extraordinary. It's sensual. It's kind of, the prose is beautiful. It kind of lures you in. The final words in the book are, just sum it up, there's this kind of one-liner he uses. It's drink and the wine will take care of the rest. And it just sums up his whole philosophy. It's like, you can't write books about this stuff. You just have to do it.
So for him, it's a spiritual experience. Very much.
And well, he's a great sage. So a lot of his other works, and a lot of his works were destroyed actually in a fire in the communist era. So we don't know some of the masterpieces that he wrote. So that's why it's even more mysterious, when you find his teachings in English, and you're like, oh my God, this man is a treasure.
How did you find him?
A friend, but Gene Keys has been popular in Hungary and in Eastern Europe, and a Hungarian friend introduced it to me, some of his writing, and said, you might like this since you're the son of a wine merchant, and I'm a lover of wine myself, and so, but he uses metaphor and allegory in a way that's so obvious and beautiful. Like there's a book he's done on trees, and he uses the tree as a symbol also, but he goes, so it's exquisite stuff, and they're short as well. And this book on wine, there's a middle part where he goes into all the wines of Hungary, and it's kind of wild, and you had no idea that Hungary had such incredible wines and different variety. And he talks about how, he's basically taken the senses and he's taken them to the very, very highest pitch, that they can possibly go to, and to the intoxication level. And so he's not for like drinking a lot of wine. He's for homeopathic tastes. And he uses wine as a springboard into talking about seduction and women and nectar and juices and sensuality and sex and and books. And he has a really good rant throughout the thing as well at the communists, who he absolutely hates, because they made him work in a factory. A genius. He had to work in a factory for 20 years. This just genius. Imagine putting Shakespeare into a factory for 20 years. That's what happened to him.
So you've been to Bulgaria?
Hungary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
So did you want to track down all of those wines?
Always. Yeah, Hungary's famous for Tokaj, which is the sweet wine they make. Really absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Well, book number 3 is a classic that's inspired and influenced generations of readers, writers and thinkers. Actually, 101 years now since it was published. Siddhartha. Hermann
Yeah,
Hesse.
I mean, it's one of the only ones that I kind of just went with because I knew that other people would have mentioned it.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and the rebel in me doesn't want to choose the same books as everyone else. But that one I just had to, because I read it when I was traveling in the Himalayas, and I literally was just climbing mountains and walking around those Himalayan foothills and in Nepal. And that was the book I read there, and steeped in the Buddhist, kind of monasteries all around and the temples. And it's an enchanting myth. It's the myth of Buddha, of the life of Buddha. But it's just, I don't think anywhere there's been a better description of the allegory of the life of the Buddha. And of course, it's not about the Buddha. It's about a young man who goes through these different phases and meets the Buddha, but then turns away from the Buddha. And so it's the story of the Buddha, but kind of it's concealed, in a very clever, it's a very beautiful, clever story. And it applies to all of us, because when we meet that higher being on the external, it's like that famous thing, if you meet the Buddha, you have to kill him. That's another book. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him.
Yeah. Was this the first of his books that you read?
I had read also Steppenwolf, which is a beautiful exploration into the shadow, and then Nazis and Goldman, which is an incredible book, and the Glass Bead Game, which I never quite got to the end of, but I realize now it's kind of a bit like the I Ching. It's his I Ching, which of course is my passion in life. So yeah, they're incredible. But it's like I've written Gene Key's a big book and some other books, and my treasure is the smallest book I've ever written, The Art of Contemplation. And in a way, that's my Siddhartha. It's a little Zen kind of under 100 pages. And I think if you can get a wisdom distilled to that length, that's why it endures. Yeah. That's why so many people would choose it, because it's an eternal fable.
That's why the 4 Agreements is so popular and powerful.
Yeah.
4 lines.
Yeah.
So what were you doing in Nepal?
Oh, I was on a seeking journey, of course. I have to go to the Himalayas and meet the Himalayan yogis. And
did you find what you were looking for?
Well, I read that book. It stayed with me as I traveled throughout those mountains, and just being there in that country and in India, because I traveled that was why I went to India and in the Himalayas. And it was a time of me, I found more than I bargained for. I found memories, soul memories for me, places that I'd been in past existences, and resonances that were so powerful in my body that I just, sometimes I couldn't contain the memory. It's like, it was so powerful when you go to places that you've been, you've been, and cultures that you've recognize. And it's an extraordinary time.
Oh, that really was the best book then for that time and that place.
Totally. Yeah.
Book number 4 is an underground classic that is said to stand beside the Seth books as a delightful and invaluable guide to our inner spirit and our outer world. This is one I've never heard of. It's Emmanuel's book, A Manual for Living Comfortably in the Cosmos.
Have you really never heard of this, Sandy?
No, I think I've seen it, but I may have, because the cover looks familiar to me.
Well, it was
don't remember it.
It was one of Ramdas's favorites.
Was it?
And yes, absolutely. I mean, that shows how amazing it is, It's an incredible book. It's, it was channeled. It's one of the first channeled books, before everyone was channeling. And it's just, you can open it on any page, meditation is a path that will help you release the treasures of self-love that rest deep within you. And it's beautiful. There's little images, and it's so friendly. It's so comforting. It's the most comforting book I have ever read. It's like, it has phrases like, death is like taking off a tight shoe, and the images are just they're so friendly. It's like a kind of enlightenment for dummies. And we're all dummies, and Emmanuel, this kind of being, whoever he is, or speaks with such kind of paternal compassion that you just sort of go, oh, I wanted to go to bed with this book. And I worked with that book. I worked with that book for years, and then there was a sequel came out, and she was channeling in New York State when I just missed her when I was going to one of my first retreats, and but she'd just been there, and I was like, wow, Emmanuel was here like a night before I arrived. And I can't imagine. I don't know where she is now. She may still be around and at it, but what a book it is, and it still stands the test of time. And it was just gifted to me recently by a very wise, skeptical friend of mine who is in his mid-80s, and he's kind of one of the sages of my life, a mentor. And I was amazed. I thought, wow, he's a real new age skeptic, but he gave me that book. And again, it was like, right, that was a stamp. That was a seal of like, this is wisdom. Yeah. This is recognized by some of the most refined minds I know. So anyway, I commend it to everyone. It's so loving and sweet. Yeah.
Yes, I saw something that Ram Dass had said in the introduction, that being with Emmanuel, one comes to appreciate the vast evolutionary context in which our lives are being lived. And at each moment we are at just the right place in the journey. As Emmanuel points out, who you are is a necessary step to being who you will be. I love that.
Yeah. And I guess I'd say to people, if you don't read any of the other books on this list, read that one.
Read that one.
Because it's the most, well, maybe Anam, Cara, but this one is just, it's so lovely. If you're anxious, or if it just, it's like you can put your head in this being's lap.
I love that. Dying is like taking off a tight shoe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, really described the mechanics of things quite, well as well, in detail, in things like dying, and because it's questions that people have asked, like, what happens when you die, Emmanuel? And it has a ring of the prophet, of like that kind of really poetically but very approachable language that kind of helps you understand arcane, difficult things, mysterious things like death and reincarnation. And as people say, there's a question: is reincarnation real? And the answer is just over like 3 or 4 pages. It's so beautiful,
I'll have to get that one for certain. So book number 5 was published in 1929, and it is Letters to a Young Poet by the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Yeah,
that's a book. That was a lovely little book. If you can get a hard copy. Rilke was a favorite poet of mine, Austrian poet, and he wrote obviously in German, which is not a language I speak, but there's some very good translations, and Joan Burnham, that one is by, and he was this incredible master of the poetic realm. And I've done a series called The Ecstatics, in which I explore people who have just tasted love in depth. And he's one I explored, and it's set to like beautiful cello music, and I explore in depth, and it's actually one of the most popular of all my recordings on YouTube. You can just look up Rilke, and it's like a 50-minute long, about his life with bits of his poetry. And he was a master he was German. He was the German Shakespeare. And his poetry is peerless and awesome and powerful. And his life story is amazing as well. He was his mother dressed him as a woman when he was a child. as a girl. So he grew up with this feminine thing, and he spent his whole life kind of seeking love through the feminine. And he had some failed relationships and loves, and as poets do, but eventually he found his aloneness. He found love in aloneness. And so he, in these letters, which are written to a young poet who writes to him and for guidance, a young would-be poet who's like writing to the great master, how shall I get my poems published, and those things. And these are letters that Rilke has written back to him that, again, it's beautiful that the man took so much time and care to respond to this, almost his younger self, And so these books are like a master talking to his younger self. But it really is, he is actually talking to a young man. And so you get the sage talking to the young man, and it's a beautiful kind of thing. The advice he gives, like some of the words he'll say is about aloneness. He'll say, to walk inside yourself for hours and not meet a soul, to sing out with your aloneness. And his poetry sings out with that kind of beauty, but it's not stark, it's rich and filled with, he lived in an extraordinary turning period time, with the at the end of the First World War, and this incredibly revolutionary time, similar time to Hermann Hesse, but really, really beautiful poetry. And I really recommend, he talks a lot about patience, that's his advice. And it's, again, resonates for me. It's one of my central teachings. Patience is how important patience is in the creative process and in your life as a whole, because there's an older man talking to a younger man saying, if I knew what I know now, this is what I'd say to my younger self. And so they're beautiful, they're short. I've chosen books that are pretty short and easy to access. So I really recommend it.
Good. We're going to take a short break now. You're listening to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's face-to-face with weekly interview series, and sharing his 10 best spiritual books with us this week is international teacher, mystic, poet, and founder of the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd. We'll be back with more of Richard Rudd's 10 best list after this short break.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Richard Rudd, book number 6, The Book of Sand by the Argentinian writer, essayist, poet and translator Jorge Luis Borges, published in 1977. You know, I have to say, your written description of this book is a piece of poetry in itself.
What did I write?
You said, these exquisite short stories from the master of magical reality sparkle like gems as we read them, mysterious quantum shards of truth that loop and curl through our cranium, short-circuiting the brain in wonderful ways. That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Well, hopefully Borges would appreciate it. Borges was a master of the short story, and he was also a great sage. I would say he was a very illuminated man. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we read a lot of prescriptive works nowadays, strategies for like how to get somewhere and how to be rich and how to be enlightened, and here are the laws of this and the. And a lot of the books I've chosen are not like that. They're right brain. And so Borges used the right brain to open up our minds and our hearts. And he's been called the father of magical realism in a way, which is what I've just described, like taking little shards of truth and then kind of creating a little story out of them that is paradoxical, like a Zen koan, but, blows your mind. And the Book of Sand is it's a series of short stories, but the Book of Sand is the key one. It's the book. It's a book that you can never get to the end of, and so that's why it's called the book. It's the Book of Eternity, and so it's a metaphor for something. And this man comes and he gives him the book. He trades, a vagabond trades this book for an old Bible with the books with the guy in the story, and then he realizes this is a magical book, and he starts trying to catalog each page in a book of his own to track it and understand it, and he can never find the same page twice. That's the nature of the Book of Sand. And you can never get to the beginning because there's always more pages, and you can never get to the end because there's always more pages. And eventually he starts to go mad because he's trying to track the infinite. And so eventually he gives up and surrenders and has his revelation and gets rid of the book and deliberately loses it. But so it's a spoiler, but you won't. The way it's written is beautiful, and the descriptions. And it's funny because in my dreams at times, I've seen this book at night. I've dreamed of it, and I've opened it, and I've seen mysterious languages from other dimensions and images of the universal truths, and fractal patterns of future humans, and not kind of that, but the matrices of how the universe all works in images, and descriptions and lines and all of that. And then I wake up and I never remember them, but I remember them enough to explain that, but I don't remember the detail. And in a way, it's a bit like that. Borges' stories they're incredible. Some of them are like one page.
So did you start having those dreams after you read his book or before?
That's a good question. I think after, probably. But, I've always had dreams like that. I've always entered into the mysteries. And my work with the Gene Keys is about downloading the template of consciousness and, the keys of life. And that's what books are. They're the key, potentially they can be keys to our soul. Borges knows that, and he uses his skill to kind of unlock doors in interdimensional thinking. It's incredible. It'll never date.
Did you notice anything happening to you as you
when
were
I read
reading it?
I think just the delight of, I recognize that there's a place where logic, it helped me see that there's a place where logic breaks down. It's paradox. And that's what his stories take us to. They take us to paradox. And then they also take us a little bit beyond paradox into love, because they're imbued with this message, subtle messages. It's not a kind of, they're not schmaltzy at all. They don't say it openly. It's inferred. It's, it's there. You can tell you're in the hands of a loving being when you read these stories. Yeah, and some of them are quite graphic as well. He wrote, some of his stories are like about knife fights, because he lived in Argentina, rough time, and he spent a lot of time in the pampas with like cowboys and stuff, and he witnessed a lot of death. And so there's one of his stories about a knife fight, and he's watching these two just kind of carve each other up. But he makes it into the story about chance and fate, and every slash is perfectly orchestrated, even though it looks completely chaotic. So there's a beauty in chaos for boy. Yeah.
Book number 7 is one that has popped up a few times, not massively, but everybody who writes it, who chooses this book, just is in love with it. And I'm sure the same applies to you. It is Anam, Cara, the Book of Celtic Wisdom by the Irish poet, writer and scholar John O'Donoghue, published in 1997.
Yeah, it'd be a tough, if someone asked me who would you most like to have for dinner, it'd be a tough decision between John O'Donoghue and Hamvash Bella, these two.
Have them both.
Exactly.
Don't limit yourself.
I'd have them both. That would be, yeah, you're right.
You need someone to bring the wine.
Exactly. And John O'Donoghue would love it.
Yeah.
I guess, I'm an old Celt, and so I had to get a Celtic one in there. And my inspiration comes from, a lot of it comes from the Celtic myths and mysteries. And John was from Ireland. He died quite young, really sad, 50 something, unexpectedly. He was a very healthy man as well, just went. And he's obviously a Christian, but a Celtic Christian, and he was very widely read. So he wasn't only a Christian; he was a Buddhist, and he knew he'd spoken to lots of interesting philosophers in his life. And it's his turn of phrase. Anam Cara means the spiritual friend. It's about friendship, and so that's a book, a bit like most of the books I've chosen. You open it on any page, and it's comforting. I have it next to me often when I drink my tea in the mornings before dawn. I have that book, and I'll often turn to it. And it's often the only book I have, and I would turn to it, and I'll open it up, and I'll read one sentence, and that is always enough. One sentence just sets me into a kind of because sometimes his turn of phrase is so exquisite, but his insights are extraordinary. So I would say that's another book. If you're going to read any books, if you haven't already read that, you must read that before you die. I can see why people fall in love with it, because it's about also, when I sit there and I'm in the mornings, I'm in my aloneness, I often think of my friends, and sometimes my past friends who've died, and my family and people, and Anam Cara keeps those alive, keeps friendships really alive in your heart. And so it's great kind of solace for the dying, and for people who are losing people, and people who are deep in suffering. That is the book. If you know someone in suffering, that's an amazing gift to give them that book. I don't know anyone that book wouldn't open.
Yeah. It's amazing what I learn about people when they talk about their books, and the choice of their books. You learn far more than you can in your average interview with somebody. And what is coming across over and over again is how not only the poetry of you are a poet, but the poetry of your soul, what attracts you, but also you love the sages.
Yes,
you love the sages.
I do.
You do.
And it was interesting because I wanted to have more women authors, and I only end up with one. But actually I realized that the books I've chosen are incredibly feminine. So the feminine is there.
Yeah. Well, book number 8 was written by a Bulgarian sage, The Wellspring of Good, The Last Words of the Master Peter Dunov. Is that
Yeah,
correct
do you know about him? Have you
pronunciation?
heard of?
I had not heard. I
Right.
looked him up after I
Yeah.
saw him on your list.
Yeah, he's worth looking up. I came across him when I started teaching in Bulgaria, and you know, talk about a sage, a living sage. I mean, he died in 1944, and he sets the bar incredibly high for in terms of his behavior, his exemplary behavior, and he looks the part as well. Big white beard, white hair, and an incredibly wise, beautiful, peaceful man. And I have another book by his that was collected after he died, by one of his disciples, and it's a book of all the miracle stories that surround him. You know, which I love reading those, because they're written after someone a great teacher dies, and they collect together all these stories from the disciples and things. And you would not believe some of these stories. I mean, he was an omniscient man. I read other books by his disciples. He had the sight, not just like psychic. He was omniscient. He saw everything. And so when you went to see him, he knew everything about you. Often the stories were, your brother you're worried about your brother because he's at the war. He's in the war. He's catching a fish, and he's going to bring it home to you, tomorrow at 4 o'clock or something. And you hear these like stories, and he knew everything. I mean, they went to him. I have to tell you this one story because it kind of circulates around him because it was very famous. He saved the lives of 40,000 Jews single-handedly, because they needed to know where the Tsar was. This was in Bulgaria. I think it was called. I don't know if it was the Bulgarian equivalent of the Tsar. It was their kind of royal family, and in order to have permission to evacuate these people, they had to have his permission in order to leave. And he was in hiding because this was in the Second World War beginning, in the middle, and so the Bulgaria was occupied by the Germans. And anyway, so someone said, why don't you go and ask the master? He knows everything, because they couldn't find this guy. And this guy came to the master, and the master said, we need to know where this man is. And the master closed his eyes, and then he opened them, and he said the name of an obscure village in the south of Bulgaria. And they hopped off and found him. And the guy said, how the hell did you find me? And the master found you, knew where you were. And anyway, so he gave his permission, and then 40,000 Jews were evacuated. The next day, the Nazis arrived and impounded, they were kind of rounding people up. So it was like, that was a real story that's circulating, a lot since the war, and quite, remarkable. So this book was his talks just in 1944 when the bombs were dropping on Sofia, and he went up into the hills to one of his disciples' houses, and he gave this series of talks about the future human and the coming of the future human and the next epoch, and it was the last. He died the following year, but these talks are just incredible. And he was a Christ, he talks about the Great White Brotherhood. He was one of those, representatives of the Great White Brotherhood, and so extraordinary, masculine, but kind of not masculine, just this male archetype of the sort of the Christ, energy.
So quite a few videos of him on YouTube.
Yeah, beautiful. And if you read the stuff, and he's famous for taking people up into the mountains in the summer and doing this dance called the Panurhythmy, which is, you can see the brotherhood and the sisterhood doing these dance. They all wear white, and they go up and they live in the high mountains. And I've been up there. I went up to that place. It's called Rila. It's the 7 sacred lakes up there, and his energy is there, and they revere him still. The brotherhood and the sisterhood are very much alive in Bulgaria. It's a really powerful group soul with a lot of wisdom in it. So yeah, beautiful people.
Book number 9, The Mother, by Sri Aurobindo. Not sure of the publication date, as there are so many books that reference the mother.
Yeah. So yeah, I had to pick one by Aurobindo because I love Sri Aurobindo, and so this was just like tiny little work. Look at that; it's like 40 pages, but it kind of encapsulates his philosophy. He was a great sage. Many people know his works and integral yoga, and an incredible being, beautiful. But this is his homage to the divine feminine, and his understanding of, again, what's coming for humanity, this incarnation of the divine feminine that's arriving finally now and is bringing harmony with it to lots of areas and of life. So this is a kind of, some of it's a little, it's rooted in some of the Indian, Vedic scriptures and stuff, which he was a great master. But it's really powerful. Just sometimes the very short, powerful text like this is a classic. It's esoteric, but it's powerful and practical, and it opens you up, opens up your heart, opens up your mind. It just, beautiful, simple, divine, never-ending, infinite wisdom.
Book number 10, Ponder on This, from the writings of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan master Djwhal Khul.
Yeah, lots of people will have heard of Alice Bailey, and this was one from my young years. So this is one of the early books I read that was passing around my circle. I fell in with a group of young spiritual men and women, actually, in North London, and we were, I guess, 20 years old, and a group of it is quite very rare. Most 20-year-olds are not doing this, but there was about, I'd say, 20 of us, and we would get together, and these books would pass around between us. And this was one. Ponder on This was like all Alice Bailey, all her channelings were massive amount of channeling of all esoteric, incredible knowledge, like she's like a housewife, right? And the same time as like the Theosophy movement came, Alice Bailey, and she, all this incredible arcane knowledge and wisdom. And Ponder on This is sort of like the best of Alice Bailey, just taken, like, I don't know which genius like pulled it all together. But it's got a little bit of everything about everything. And so whatever question you have, it's a book you can open randomly, and there's some beautiful insight about, whether it's the coming of the cosmic Christ, or whether it's, the way in which the power of the intuition and how it connects us to Shambhala, or, the layers of avatars that come into the world. And, it's great stuff. And I love that. I had to put it there because, I read every single page of that book over and over and over again, and we would open it at random and read it to each other, us young kind of seekers, and we were always like blown away by it. We were big fans of Alice Bailey. Yeah, so really lovely to have it in there.
Well, that's your 10 best list. I want to talk a little bit about your own life journey now. I mean, I know North London pretty well. Yes, what you said about it being rare, very rare. Where did this all start for you? I mean, you're the son of a winemaker. At what point did you go off of the path that they may have thought that they'd laid out for you?
Yeah, I went off piste. I think it was when I was 18, really, at university, and that because I'd met this group, and my best friend at university, people kept saying, "Have you met this guy? Have you met this guy? You need to meet this guy." And they kept saying the same to him, and then we met, and he was and we became best friends, and he was really into Rudolf Steiner, and so he introduced me to Steiner, and I introduced him to some of the things that I was into, and out of that our friendship, came this other group in London. He was from North London, from Hampstead, that area. and there was a group of this group of kind of really amazing souls, all looking for something together, and we would come up to Scotland, because I went to Edinburgh University, and I had a little bit of an inheritance, a small one, and I spent it on this little cottage, in the Highlands, like, just this little tiny shepherd's croft, they're called crofts, up in a remote glen, a remote valley. And we would all go up there, and the people, the guys from London would come up, and we would sort of meditate out in the wilds of Scotland, and we wore kilts, and we kind of ran down the mountainside barefoot, screaming like Highlander, before Highlander came out. And we meditated, and we were learning kind of the arcane arts and alchemy and things like that. And it was an extraordinary, rich time. And yeah, that was where a lot of my breakthroughs came, being part of the brotherhood, and the sisterhood, because after a while women started coming as well, and more people heard about us. And from the London set, people would hear about this group in Scotland, and they would say, how do I get in? How do I come? And so people started arriving, and strangers would come, and we had to expand kind of where people slept, and we had to use the farmer's house down the road. And the farmer was this lovely toothless kind of shepherd man who come up to me and go, what you doing up there? You're meditating again. He was a real rough farmer, but he was a beautiful man. Doogie, his name was. And anyway, so we looked after him in the valley. We helped him with his sheep sometimes. So we were very integrated. We weren't this kind of only spiritual people. I've always had that, like, I need to be an ordinary human being at the same time as being this, this other being. So yeah.
Your best known creation is the Gene Keys, which you received in a transmission 21 years ago. Are there any of the books that you've mentioned that that you can pinpoint as being pivotal in opening you up to the point where you could receive this incredible, and it is an incredible body of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, it's almost like they chipped away at parts of my illusion. And, there's a little bit over here, and they just chipped away. And some of them, like Osho, smashed down walls, particularly in my English upbringing, and kind of crashed open. So that was a teaching that opened my heart to craziness. As I got into that, I was like, I'm going to just go crazy. I'm going to do some crazy things. And I needed that time in my life to just go a bit nuts. Yeah. And I did. I really vented the kind of rage of from my childhood English Victorian upbringing in a way. And my parents were very loving, actually. So it's but it was there in the boarding school system that I was part of. And I had to kind of crash out of that. But then other ones were much more refined, and they came in perfect timing, as often these teachings do, So as I sort of got past some of those difficult shadows, I'd get more and more refined, like Bain Saduno, that teacher from Bulgaria, very refined teachings, like the highest level. And they were kind of putting building blocks on the top of my cathedral, so that I could build the roof. And so together, all these different codings helped me remember, why I was here. But I couldn't place any particular one of them any more than any other. They all combined, as books do, teachers do, teachings, paths that we take. They're all part of the journey. Yeah. But they prepared me for sure. And a lot that I haven't mentioned.
Do you think that you ever knew that you were going to channel something like the Gene Keys, or was it a complete surprise to you?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say I channeled it. I never call myself a channel.
You received it?
Yeah, I definitely received it. It just, I think authors do receive, or teachers receive their teachings, they come. And I knew that something was going to happen, even in that time, in our 20s, and then we all kind of got, life came, and then some of them started to get married and go off and have kids, and they, went off into the world, and I was left there. I was like, shit, I'm the only one left. And I was still there at 28, and nothing had happened. I was like, why can't I get on with my life like everyone else? And it was just that I had to hold my nerve a little bit longer, and then the explosion happened. And then after the explosions happened, you have no idea what to do with it. That's the worst time, because you had the download or the epiphany or the kind of divine revelation, and then you've got to kind of try and put it all back together and make a form out of it and make a teaching, which I had no idea. Like it took me years and many helpers and friends, and now a whole team, to build the Gene Keys as a set of teachings, wisdom teachings. That takes more than I'm capable of. Alone.
For those who may not be familiar with the Gene Keys, I mean, I gave a very brief description of it earlier, but in your words, what will people get from it?
Yeah, well, it's like stepping into a mystery school, since that's what what I've been exploring my whole life. But it's very practical. So where most people begin is they come into the website, thegenekeys.com, and they get a Gene Keys profile, which is a series of algorithms that unlock awakening processes, and they're unique to you. So it uses astrological data, but it's not astrology, and it uses the I Ching, and it uses lots of different systems synthesized, including some aspects of human design, if you know what that is.
Yes.
And then it starts to it gives you a journey. It shows you, that profile shows you your mythic journey to awakening, step by step, in sequences. And our DNA awakens in sequences. It unlocks everything about us, unlocks in sequences. And so it gives us a step-by-step journey through our awakening, and that can include our, healing our trauma from our past. That's part of it. Opening up to true prosperity through collaborative, opening your heart up and working with synchronicity so that you draw in the right allies to help your purpose manifest. And of course, finding what your purpose really is. That's a deep part of it, working with the Gene Keys. It really helps you find a sense of purpose. But you have to work with it for a while. It's not a kind of quick fix teaching. It's a big body that you come into, you step in the door, and then you go, wow, this is if you really get bitten by it, it'll hold you for years, because there's a lot. I've packed in 20 years of condensed practices, protocols, sort of pathways. It's a whole living community. It's not just about learning. It's about learning from yourself, from your own wisdom. That's what it's really all about. It's about unlocking your wisdom. It's not about learning anything new, information wise. It's about wisdom. So yeah, that's the purpose behind it.
You also have, several other programs that have come since then that expand on it. And there's many of them. There's the Venus sequence and the Pearl sequence, and quite a lot there. The activation sequence. Does someone have to do them all?
No, not at all. It depends on the person. Sometimes just one of them is enough to unlock you, and then you may be ready to move on. Or if you want to go very deep, then there's more than enough to keep you going. Because in a way, it's all sacred teachings are a trick, all of them, because they're tricking you into something that can't be said and can't be taught, which is your own inner wisdom, your soul's wisdom. So they trick you through awakening you. But the teaching is never the thing. Like Buddha said, the teaching is just the raft that gets you to the other side. And once you're at the other side, you don't need the raft anymore. So don't get hooked on the raft. And so Gene Keys is the same, but it is a fractal wisdom. So you can use it in the way I used all these different books. You can use different aspects of it to awaken different aspects of your consciousness. Like you said, the Venus sequence awakens, your heart through healing your trauma. The pearl awakens you through healing your sense of lack, and therefore brings you prosperity. But then you have to know how to handle that prosperity, and that's also part of learning the pearl. And then there's the dream arc, which I think you know about, Sandy, which is a whole shamanic journey through the gene keys, which works with our dreams and our kind of other dimensional realities through animals and birds and creatures. And they're layer upon layer of different transmissions woven into the field of the gene keys. So
how do they come in? I mean, do you just find something else drops in and you've received this whole other,
Well, when I received it, it was all one thing, right? It was all one. It was complete, like a cathedral that had already been built. And I saw the architecture of the whole thing. So now I've just been building it. And one day I'll finish building it. And then others will probably carry it on and maybe add extensions when I'm gone or whatever. But there's a finite set of structures to the teaching. It came as a whole, and I'm still assembling. I'm building the south wall with the big rose window, and then finally we get to put the roof on, and then I'm kind of done.
And then
we can just then what?
Go up to the croft in Scotland again.
Maybe we just sit there and greet people at the door. And I love offering people tea, so that I just like to be there and greet people as they come in and meet people face to face. And that's what I really love. I love just meeting. I'm just a normal person that loves meeting people, and I'd love to sit and have tea with everyone. So that's my highest goal, is to have the cathedral built, not literally a cathedral, but the teachings, and then everyone that comes who's drawn to them, I love to see how it helps them in their lives in different ways. I love hearing those stories. It helped me with my marriage. It helped me with my child. It helped me with my cancer. It helped me with my, I hear all the stories. I don't even give instructions about how to heal cancer or how to deal with your children. It's each person's own wisdom that finds the answers. That's why the foundation to it is called the art of contemplation. It teaches you how to contemplate, and therefore unlock your own wisdom.
Do you think that this is what you came to do?
Yeah. Is there anything, I can't think of anything more exciting and better. And I do it with people I love. I have an amazing team. We're global. The Gene Keys is in like over 25 languages now. And so I get to travel when I have time to all these beautiful places and meet incredible people who are drawn like bees to the same vision. And you know that the core of the Gene Keys is a prophecy that this is about the future human. And so these are the teachings for helping us become the future human. They may not be the only teachings, but they're deliberately coded with that purpose, to awaken that highest level, but integrated into society. That's really, really important. Not just some kind of wafty, fringe-dwelling group of brotherhood sisters. This is like Hamvash Bella. This is like right in the heart of samsara, right in the heart of life. We have to be here in the body, deep embodiment. Yeah.
The Art of Contemplation book, you say that it's the central technique, that underpins the Gene Keys teachings. What's the difference for you between contemplation and meditation?
Well, contemplation is a broader kind of term than meditation. It can include meditation. And in a way, it's, I kind of joked recently, I said, it's like meditating with your eyes open. So we're contemplating now, you're receiving, I'm giving. It could, we were sitting having a glass of wine, we would alternate that, and contemplation can be done in so many different ways. It's about applying our longing for higher consciousness to, our life. So it creates an internal focus, but it can include words and language. It doesn't have to negate those things. It can include silence. It can include formal meditation. It can include all kinds of yogic practices, and it can include anything. It's a very wide, broad path word. But essentially, there is a very simple essence to it, which I capture in that book, which is we need to learn to slow down and pause often in our lives, in our busy lives, because it's in those pauses that the future consciousness is growing inside us. So if we don't stop regularly and just look at what's around us, we can't evolve, because we're not allowing that future consciousness to bud and flower inside us. So we have to create spaces, and that's what the contemplative practices do. They create spaces. I've got a lovely little app. I don't know if you've got it yet, Sandy. It's on the App Store. It's a free app. It's called the Triple Flame, and it's on your, so you can get it on your phone, and it helps you, reminds you to pause. You can set it how you want. Every 3 hours on the 3, 6, 9, 12, it invites you to pause for 3 minutes. That's why it's called the Triple Flame. And there's little meditations, and you can either do a guided one or a silent one, or you can be driving, but you just drive with awareness, or you can do OMS with me. I sort of do some OMS. It's one of the options, or you can just do silent, and you can extend if you want. But the magic of it is it shows you how many other people are pausing right now. So I can go on right now, and I can look at it and I go, well, it's and I click on it, and right now 5 beings are pausing. Isn't that cool?
Very cool.
At
What's
a random
it called again?
time. It's called the Triple Flame.
The Triple Flame. That's
and
good.
It's got a little quote. The quote's random. It's better to be screwed up and aware than perfect and pretending to be aware. So the quotes change, and they're taken from the Gene Keys or aspects of them. And you can, we've got another version coming where we're going to do the cosmic clock. So it's going to bing. You can choose. It's going to bing you at 11:11, 2:22, 3:33. It's going to be playful as well. It's a way of just reminding ourselves throughout the day that we're not alone, and that we're in a pausing practice, and that can create magic in our lives. And eventually I'd like to have 10,000 people pausing, so when I look at that, I want to see it saying 10,000 people are now pausing around, and we're going to give a map as well, so you can see where they are.
Yeah. Nice. Very nice. I do love the Art of Contemplation book. I mean, I've never been very good at meditating.
No.
But when I, have spoken to you before about that book, I realize that's exactly what I do. I contemplate, and that's enough.
Most of us have that gift. It's an art that we can develop, though.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of material on your website. You have a lot of free stuff. I don't know if you'd like to tell people before we leave what they can find there.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the YouTube channel and Gene Keys Instagram if you like that. There's a lot of free stuff on YouTube. Got a lot of videos. I got a lot of books out as well on Amazon, and you can see them all on my website. It's probably the best place to look at them, and then you can buy them through Amazon. And if you want to start somewhere, the most popular program is called the Activation Sequence. So you get your profile, and then it's part 1, and it guides you in, and it's really popular. It gives you a sense of, well, what is my true purpose? And there are lots, and also I should say, there's a little button in there. If you click it, it says it's the one that we always avoid, where it says, "Oh, do you want the newsletter?" and you never click that box, right? You got to click that box in this instance, because it's called the Pulse, and it's not a newsletter; it's a love letter. And we send it every 6 or 7 days, and it shows you the gene key that's transiting right now, and its highest aspect, and it gives you the little free audio by me of that key and what its challenge is. And then it also shows you some other stuff like my latest videos or whatever news, and which you're free to look at or not. But it's a really lovely. It's a way of staying in touch with our community, and we've been profiling community members as well recently, from around the world, so that you can get to know and see how the Gene Keys is growing in different countries, and and it's a lovely community.
It is a
Everyone's
lovely
welcome.
community. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
is your Dream Arc community.
Yeah, and the Dream Arc,
And
another
that is a whole other piece of
whole
work,
other ball game.
Yeah, a whole other ball game. And you dive in there and you may not surface for months.
Years.
Years even. Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard, it's been a real delight to talk with you and to hear about your 10 best books. It's especially gratifying for me because when I come across books I haven't heard about and, a guest describes them in a way that makes me go, yes, 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 then I can
I'm
add them
hoping
to
that
my
that's
list.
the case with others as well, that some
Yeah.
people will be inspired by some of these choices so that
Oh,
they're,
I'm sure. I'm sure.
find their way to those authors.
Richard Rudd, thank you for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thanks, Andy. It's a great thing you're doing here.
Thank you. So for more information about discovering your hidden genius with Gene Keys, unlocking prosperity, and awakening your heart with other associated programs such as the Venus Sequence, Corpus Christi teachings, the 7 Sacred Seals, etc., visit genekeys.com. Very simple. You can't forget that one. GENEKEYS.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Richard Rudd.
Thanks, Andy.